The dust devils danced across the barren stretches of the Badlands, spinning their wild waltz under a merciless August sun. Clara Whitmore adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders. Though it offered little protection from the grit that found its way into every fold of fabric, every crease of skin. Behind her, young Samuel trudged along in silence, as he had for the past 3 years since the fever took his voice along with their parents. Wyoming territory stretched before them like a canvas painted in ochre and rust, interrupted only by the jagged teeth of red rock formations that jutted from the earth. Clara had counted 17 days since they'd left the last settlement. 17 days of rationing water from their single canteen. 17 days of wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake leaving Missouri behind. "Just a little further, Sam," she murmured, though she knew he couldn't hear the tremor in her voice. The boy, all of 10 years old, simply nodded and shifted the weight of their meager possessions on his thin shoulders. The sun was beginning its descent when they reached Wind's Hollow, a narrow pass between 2 towering cliffs that locals had warned her about back in Cheyenne. "Nothing good comes through Wind's Hollow after dark," the innkeeper's wife had said, crossing herself. But Clara had no choice. The direct route would save them 2 days' travel, and their supplies were already running dangerously low. They were halfway through the pass when the sound of horses echoed off the canyon walls. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, their faces flushed with drink, clothes bearing the telltale dust of the copper mines. Clara's hand instinctively went to Samuel's shoulder, pulling him closer. Well, the largest of the men slurred, his beard matted with tobacco juice. "What have we here? A lady and her pup, all alone in the wilderness." "We mean no trouble," Clara said steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "We're just passing through." The second man, lean as a coyote and twice as mean-looking, dismounted with a stumble. "Passing through requires a toll. Don't it, boys?" His companions laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Clara backed against the rock wall, pushing Samuel behind her. The third man, younger than the others but with eyes that held no warmth, reached for her worn carpet bag. "Let's see what treasures you're carrying, pretty lady." The crack of a rifle shot split the air like thunder. The bullet struck the ground inches from the young man's boot, sending up a spray of dust and pebbles. All 3 men froze. "Next one won't miss." The voice came from above, cold as winter wind. Clara looked up to see a lone figure silhouetted against the dying light, rifle steady in his hands. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, completely still except for the slight adjustment of his aim. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the bearded man called out, though his bravado had dimmed considerably. "Made it my concern." The rider's voice carried no emotion, no threat, just simple fact. "You boys have exactly 10 seconds to mount up and ride back the way you came." The lean man's hand twitched toward his sidearm, but another shot rang out, this time taking his hat clean off his head. "That's 5 seconds gone," the stranger said. They didn't need the full 10. The 3 men scrambled for their horses, cursing and spitting, but moving with the urgent grace of those who recognized death when it spoke to them. Within moments, the thunder of hooves faded into the distance. Clara remained pressed against the rock. Samuel's fingers twisted in her skirts. The stranger descended the narrow trail with an ease that spoke of long familiarity with the rough country. As he drew closer, she could make out his features in the gathering dusk, a face carved by wind and sun, marked by lines that spoke of hard years. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his weathered skin. He dismounted at a respectful distance, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, took in their pitiful state, the worn clothes, the single bag between them, the boy's hollow cheeks. "You hurt?" The question was brief, practical. Clara found her voice. "No, sir. We're grateful for your intervention." He nodded once, then looked at Samuel. Something flickered in his expression when he noticed the boy's silence, the way Samuel's hands moved in small gestures instead of words. The stranger's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Traveling alone through Wind's Hollow? That's either brave or foolish. Desperate. Clara admitted. There seemed no point in pretense. We're seeking work. I was told there might be opportunities at the settlements near the Snake River. Long way yet. 2, maybe 3 days if you're lucky. He studied their thin provisions with a practiced eye. You won't make it on what you're carrying. Clara's pride flared despite her exhaustion. We'll manage. We've come this far. Have you now? It wasn't a question. The stranger moved to his saddlebags, pulling out a bundle of dried meat and a full water skin. He set them on a flat rock between them, then stepped back. My place is half a day's ride north. Got need of someone who can cook and tend house. Work for wages and board, if you're interested. Clara hesitated. Trading the unknown dangers of the trail for the unknown dangers of this man's hospitality seemed like exchanging one risk for another. But Samuel swayed on his feet, and she knew they were running on borrowed time. What assurance do I have of your intentions? Mr. Hartwell. Jed Hartwell. He pulled a worn letter from his coat, holding it out for her inspection. From Reverend Morrison in Laramie. He'll vouch for my character, such as it is. Clara read the letter by the dying light, noting the Reverend's careful script confirming that one Jedediah Hartwell was a man of his word, though given to solitude. It was dated 6 months prior. You often hire strangers from the trail. Mr. Hartwell. No. His eyes moved to the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to emerge. But winter's coming. House needs tending. Can you cook? Yes. Tend wounds. Basic doctoring. My father was a physician. I assisted him for years. Then we have terms, unless you prefer taking your chances with the night and whatever else uses this pass after dark. As if to emphasize his point. A coyote's howl echoed through the canyon, soon joined by others. Samuel pressed closer to Clara's side. We accept, Clara said, lifting her chin. But I have conditions. We keep to separate quarters. My brother stays with me always, and wages paid weekly, not monthly. Something that might have been respect glinted in Hartwell's eyes. Fair enough. Can the boy ride? At Clara's nod. Hartwell whistled low. A second horse emerged from the shadows. A gentle-looking mare with a steady temperament. She'll carry you both. Follow close and don't wander. Country gets treacherous in the dark. As they prepared to mount, Clara noticed how Hartwell moved with careful efficiency, never quite turning his back to them, keeping that comfortable distance. A man accustomed to solitude, she thought, and perhaps to disappointment. The journey north took them through landscape that shifted from barren rock to scrub pine, following trails that would have been invisible to Clara's untrained eye. Hartwell rode ahead, silent as a ghost, occasionally raising a hand to signal a change in direction. The moon rose full and bright, casting everything in silver and shadow. Samuel dozed against Clara's back, his small body finally giving in to exhaustion. She held him steady with one arm while gripping the saddle horn with her free hand, grateful for the mare's steady gait. It was near midnight when they crested a rise and Hartwell's ranch came into view. Even in the moonlight, Clara could see it was a modest spread, a main house built of logs and stone, a barn, a few outbuildings, all arranged with practical efficiency. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone had kept the home fires burning. You live here alone? Clara asked, the first words spoken in hours. Yes. Hartwell dismounted, moving to help them down. His hands were steady but impersonal as he lifted Samuel from the saddle, setting the boy on his feet with surprising gentleness. House has 3 rooms. You and the boy can take the back one. There's a bolt on the inside. Clara appreciated the unspoken understanding in that statement. As she gathered their few belongings, she noticed how Hartwell's gaze kept drifting to the dark line of trees that marked the path to the river, his expression unreadable. One more thing, he said as they approached the house. I keep my privacy. Don't ask questions about what's not your business, and we'll get along fine. That seems fair, Mr. Hartwell. We have our own secrets to keep. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Breakfast is at dawn. I'll expect biscuits and coffee. Supplies are in the pantry." With that, he disappeared into the barn, leaving Clara and Samuel standing before the dark doorway of their new, if temporary, home. She felt the weight of the day's events settling into her bones, the close call at Wind's Hollow already seeming like something from another lifetime. Taking Samuel's hand, she stepped across the threshold, into whatever salvation or sorrow this lonely ranch might hold. The morning sun cast long shadows through the kitchen window as Clara surveyed her new domain. Dust motes danced in the light, settling on every surface like a shroud. The house had the peculiar stillness of a place where life had retreated to the corners, leaving only echoes behind. She'd been up since before dawn, true to her word, though her biscuits had turned out harder than she'd intended in the unfamiliar stove. Hartwell had eaten them without complaint, washing them down with the bitter coffee she'd managed to brew. He'd left for the range without a word beyond a brief nod, leaving her to explore the confines of their arrangement. The kitchen was well stocked but neglected. Cast iron pans hung from hooks, their surfaces dull with disuse. Sacks of flour and beans lined the pantry shelves, alongside preserves whose labels had faded beyond reading. Everything spoke of function over comfort, of a life pared down to its barest essentials. As she worked to bring order to the chaos, Clara noticed the details that told a different story. A delicate teacup, clearly part of a set now broken, sat alone on a high shelf. Gingham curtains, now gray with dust, still held hints of careful stitching. These were remnants of another hand, another presence that had once softened the harsh edges of this place. Samuel had taken to following her like a shadow, his eyes wide as he explored their new surroundings. When she found him trying to peer into a locked room at the end of the hall, she gently steered him away. "Not our business, Sam," she whispered, remembering Hartwell's warning. By midday, she'd made significant progress. The kitchen floor showed its true color, a warm pine beneath years of neglect. The windows, cleared of grime, let in streams of clear light. As she paused to wipe her brow, her hand brushed against something tucked behind a row of jars on a high shelf. It was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. The first page bore a name in elegant script, Elizabeth Hartwell, her recipes and remedies. Clara's hand stilled. Elizabeth? Eliza? She shouldn't look. It wasn't her business. But something in the careful handwriting, the way certain recipes were annotated with notes like Jed's favorite or good for cold winter nights, made her heart ache with unexpected kinship. Here was another woman who had tried to make a home in this desolate place. The recipes were practical but touched with small flourishes, a pinch of precious cinnamon in the apple preserves, honey in the cornbread when sugar would have sufficed. Clara found herself studying them, memorizing the preferences of a man she barely knew through the observations of a woman she'd never meet. The sound of boots on the porch made her quickly return the journal to its hiding place. Samuel, who'd been drawing with a stub of charcoal on some old paper, looked up expectantly. Hartwell entered, favoring his left side. Blood seeped through a tear in his shirt, and his face was tight with controlled pain. What happened? Clara moved toward him instinctively, her father's training overriding any hesitation. "Horse spooked. Caught me on some wire." He shrugged off her concern, but swayed slightly on his feet. "Sit," Clara commanded, her tone brooking no argument. To her surprise, he complied, sinking into a kitchen chair with barely concealed relief. She gathered her supplies, the small medical kit she'd salvaged from her father's practice. Hot water, clean cloth. Hartwell watched her preparations with wary eyes, like a wild animal deciding whether to bolt or submit. "The shirt needs to come off," Clara said matter-of-factly. His jaw tightened. "I can tend it myself. You can't properly clean a wound you can't see." "Unless you'd prefer infection and fever." She met his gaze steadily. "I've seen worse than a man's bare chest. Mr. Hartwell, I'm not some sheltered miss." After a long moment, he reached for the buttons with his good hand. Clara helped him ease the bloodied fabric away, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. But it wasn't the fresh wound that made her breath catch. It was the network of old scars that mapped his torso. Some faded white, others still pink, telling stories of violence and survival. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. Hartwell remained stone still, his breathing carefully controlled. Only when she began stitching did she speak again. "This will hurt. Been hurt before," he said quietly. Samuel had crept closer, watching with fascination as Clara's needle moved in precise strokes. When she finished, the boy offered Hartwell a glass of water, which the man accepted with surprising gentleness. "Thank you, son," Hartwell said, and Samuel beamed at being addressed directly. As Clara bandaged the wound, she noticed a photograph partially hidden beneath some papers on the side table. A woman's face gazed out, young, lovely, with kind eyes and a smile that suggested secrets shared. Without thinking, Clara asked, "Is that your wife?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hartwell's face closed off completely, becoming the mask of the stranger who'd rescued them in the pass. She's dead." The words fell like stones into still water. Clara's hand stilled on the bandage. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "The boy can have the old room next to yours. There are some books in there, paper too, if he likes to draw." Hartwell stood abruptly, pulling on his torn shirt without waiting for her to finish securing the bandage. "I'll be in the barn." He was gone before Clara could respond, leaving her standing with bloodied water and the ghost of a woman's smile. That evening, she prepared supper using one of Eliza's recipes, a simple stew, but one marked warming in the margins. Hartwell ate in silence at first, but after the third spoonful, his shoulders seemed to lose some of their tension. "This is familiar," he said. Not quite a question. Clara chose her words carefully. Good food doesn't need to be complicated, just made with care. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. The boy, Samuel, he doesn't speak. Not for 3 years now. The doctor said it might return with time and patience, or it might not. Clara watched Samuel carefully spreading butter on his bread, his movements precise despite his young age. He understands everything, though he's smart as a whip. I noticed the drawing he made. It showed real observation. Hartwell paused, seeming to weigh his words. "There's an old desk in that room. He's welcome to use it." It was an olive branch of sorts, and Clara accepted it as such. "That's kind of you." The rest of the meal passed in more comfortable silence. After supper, Hartwell retreated to the barn as seemed to be his custom, while Clara cleaned up and settled Samuel for the night. As she tucked the boy in, he traced letters on her palm. "Home? For now," she whispered, smoothing his hair. "We're safe for now." Later, unable to sleep, Clara found herself in the kitchen again. She discovered Eliza's recipe journal earlier and couldn't resist looking through it more thoroughly. By lamplight, she read the careful notations, the loving observations of a woman trying to nurture life in a hard place. One entry near the back caught her eye. "Bread rises better when you sing to it. Mother always said so." Jay laughs. "But he eats every crumb when I hum the old hymns while kneading." Clara's throat tightened. She'd done the same thing, learned from her own mother. How many women across this vast, lonely frontier carried these same small rituals, these acts of faith disguised as domestic tasks? She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Hartwell return until his shadow fell across the page. She started, guilty at being caught with the journal. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." She'd have liked knowing someone was using them again. His voice was rough, as if the words were pulled from some deep place. "The recipes, no point in them gathering dust." He turned to go, then paused. "That stew tonight? You found her notes?" It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Clara nodded. She was a good woman, deserved better than... He cut himself off, shoulders rigid. "Deserved better." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the journal and the weight of unspoken griefs. Outside, a coyote howled, and the wind whispered secrets through the cracks in the walls. She closed the journal carefully, running her fingers over the name on the cover. Elizabeth Hartwell had tried to make a home here, had kneaded love into bread and stirred hope into simple stews. Now she was gone, leaving behind a grieving man who'd retreated so far into his pain that he'd almost disappeared entirely. Clara understood grief. She understood loss. But as she banked the fire and prepared for bed, she wondered if understanding would be enough to navigate the careful distance Hartwell maintained, or if some wound simply ran too deep to heal. Through her window, she could see a light burning in the barn loft where Hartwell had made his retreat. Two solitary souls, sharing a roof but not a life, each nursing scars that might never fully fade. It wasn't the fresh start she'd hoped for when they'd fled Missouri, but it was shelter. For now, that would have to be enough. Tomorrow, she would make biscuits again. This time, she'd try Eliza's recipe, the one marked Jay's favorite, extra salt. Small gestures, small mercies. Sometimes that's all you could offer in a hard land that asked everything and promised nothing in return. Spring arrived tentatively in Wyoming, bringing with it a softening of the hard edges of winter. Clara had learned the rhythms of the ranch, the quiet patterns that governed their strange household. Mornings began with coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, followed by Hartwell's departure to tend the stock. Evenings ended with him retreating to the barn, leaving her and Samuel to their own devices. It had been 2 weeks since the incident in the kitchen, and Clara had noticed the shift in Hartwell's demeanor. Where before he'd been merely distant, now he seemed actively troubled. His appetite had waned, and more than once she'd caught him staring at nothing, his jaw clenched tight as if fighting some internal battle. The morning she began humming was like any other. She was kneading bread, the rhythm of the work soothing in its familiarity. The melody rose unbidden, an old hymn her mother had loved. "Shall we gather at the river?" The words stayed locked in her throat, but the tune floated through the kitchen like a half-remembered dream. She didn't hear the door open, didn't notice Hartwell's presence until the crash of broken crockery made her spin around. He stood in the doorway, coffee cup shattered at his feet, his face drained of all color. His eyes held a wildness she'd never seen before, like a man confronted by a ghost. "Where?" His voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Where did you learn that hymn?" Clara's hand stilled on the dough. "My mother taught it to me. She learned it from her mother before that. It's—" "Stop!" The word came out sharp enough to cut. Hartwell's hands trembled as he gripped the door frame. "Just stop!" He turned and fled, leaving Clara standing in a kitchen full of morning light and broken porcelain. Samuel, who'd been drawing at the table, looked up with worried eyes. He made the sign they'd developed for scared, and Clara couldn't disagree. She found Hartwell by the river an hour later. She'd tracked him easily enough, in his distress. He'd left a clear trail through the new grass. He sat on a fallen log, a bottle of whiskey beside him, staring at the water as it rushed past. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning. "Perhaps not." Clara kept her distance, sensing the fragility of the moment. "But leaving things unsaid hasn't served either of us well." He took a long pull from the bottle. "That hymn, she sang it every Sunday, every blessed Sunday while she did the washing." His laugh held no humor. "Said it reminded her of home, of the church where we married." Clara said nothing, understanding that sometimes silence was the greatest kindness. The river took her on a morning just like this. Spring runoff, water running high and fast. She'd gone to pick the early blackberries. Couldn't wait for them to fully ripen. Always impatient. My Eliza. His voice roughened. "I told her to wait. Told her the banks would be slick. But she laughed. Said I worried too much." He turned the bottle in his hands, watching the whiskey catch the light. "I heard her scream. By the time I reached the bank, she was already in the current. I tried. God knows I tried. But the water—" He gestured helplessly at the river. "I've never learned to swim. Watched her reach for me. Watched her go under. And I couldn't do a damn thing but stand there like a coward." "That's not cowardice. Clara said quietly. That's human limitation. Tell that to her grave. He took another drink. Tell that to the empty bed and the silence where her singing used to be. Clara moved closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. Is that why you sleep in the barn? He nodded slowly. Can't stand the house at night. Too many echoes. Too many moments when I forget she's gone and turn to tell her something. He looked at Clara then, his eyes red-rimmed. Then you came, humming her songs, cooking her recipes, like the universe was playing some cruel joke. I'm sorry, Clara said, meaning it. I had no idea. How could you? He set the bottle aside, running his hands through his hair. I've been a fool, punishing you for the crime of being alive when she isn't. They sat in silence for a while, watching the river that had taken so much. Finally, Hartwell spoke again, his voice steadier. She would have liked you, practical, no nonsense, but kind underneath. She had a way of seeing the good in people. He smiled faintly, even when they didn't deserve it. That evening, for the first time, Hartwell ate dinner in the kitchen instead of taking his plate to the porch. The conversation was stilted at first, but Samuel helped bridge the gap, showing Hartwell his latest drawing, a surprisingly accurate depiction of the ranch at sunset. Boy's got talent, Hartwell observed. Mike could use some proper pencils instead of charcoal. It was a small offer, but Clara recognized it for what it was, a tentative step towards something resembling normalcy. Later, as she cleaned up, Hartwell lingered instead of retreating to his usual solitude. I owe you better than I've given, he said quietly. You've brought life back to this place, even if it hurts to see it sometimes. Pain means you're still alive, Clara replied, wringing out the dishcloth. It's when you stop feeling that you need to worry. He studied her with those storm-gray eyes. Speaking from experience? My husband died in the war, my parents. Shortly after, everything I knew, everyone I loved, gone in the space of 2 seasons. She met his gaze steadily. But Sam needed me. So I learned to carry the grief instead of letting it carry me. And if you didn't have the boy? Clara considered the question. Then I'd have to find another reason. The sunrise, maybe, or the way bread smells when it's fresh from the oven. Small things, but enough to anchor a person to life. Hartwell stood slowly, favoring his still healing side. Eliza used to say something similar. Said joy could be found in a perfectly risen loaf or a wildflower blooming where it shouldn't. He paused at the door. Maybe that's why it hurt so much. Hearing you hum felt like she was trying to tell me something through you. Maybe she was, Clara suggested gently. Maybe she was reminding you that life goes on, whether we give it permission or not. He left without responding, but Clara noticed he headed for the house instead of the barn. The next morning, she found a package on the kitchen table, proper drawing pencils for Samuel, wrapped in brown paper and string. No note, but none was needed. Samuel clutched them like treasure, his face bright with joy. That day passed more peacefully than any before it. Hartwell worked closer to the house, mending fences that had waited through winter. Clara caught him watching sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful rather than pained. As evening approached, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, and the wind howled like a living thing. Clara hurried to bring in the washing while Hartwell secured the livestock. They collided in the barn doorway just as the skies opened. Rain fell in sheets, turning the ground to mud in seconds. Hartwell pulled her inside, both of them breathless and soaked. Hell of a storm, he said, water dripping from his hair. Clara laughed, surprising herself with the sound. I've seen worse. Missouri storms could strip paint from a barn. They stood close in the dim light, rain drumming on the roof. Clara became acutely aware of his presence, the heat of him despite the cold rain. His eyes dropped to her lips, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with possibility. Then thunder crashed overhead, breaking the spell. Hartwell stepped back, his walls sliding back into place. "You should get to the house. Check on the boy." But even his retreat felt different. Less like fleeing, more like a strategic withdrawal. Clara gathered her wet skirts and made for the door, pausing at the threshold. "Thank you for the pencils." Sam was overjoyed. "Boy deserves something nice now and again." Hartwell's voice was gruff, but not unkind. "We all do." Clara ran through the rain to the house, her heart beating faster than the sprint warranted. Inside, she found Samuel safe and dry, already experimenting with his new pencils. She changed into dry clothes and set about making coffee, knowing Hartwell would need warming when he finally came in. As she worked, she thought about grief and healing, about the strange paths that brought broken people together. She thought about Eliza, the woman whose ghost haunted every corner of this house, and wondered what she would make of the careful dance Clara and Hartwell were performing around each other. The storm raged on, but inside the kitchen was warm and bright. When Hartwell finally appeared, dripping and shivering, Clara had hot coffee and dry clothes waiting. He accepted both with a gratitude that went beyond words. They sat at the kitchen table, listening to the storm, not speaking but not needing to. Samuel joined them, working contentedly on a drawing of the ranch in the rain. It was almost, Clara thought, like a family, almost like home, but she'd learned to be wary of almost. Too many things could fit in the space between almost and enough. Word traveled fast in the Wyoming territory, carried on the wind like tumbleweed and gossip. Within a month of Clara's arrival at the Hartwell Ranch, the good people of Cedar Ridge had begun to talk. A young widow living with a widower. No chaperone save a mute boy. It was enough to set tongues wagging from the general store to the church steps. Clara first became aware of the whispers during her weekly trip to town for supplies. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, drew her skirts aside as Clara passed, as if proximity might stain her reputation. At Morrison's general store, conversations halted when she entered, resuming in hushed tones once she'd moved to another aisle. "Don't let them bother you," advised Mrs. Chen, the Chinese laundress who knew something about being an outsider. Small minds need something to chew on. But it did bother her, more than she cared to admit. Not for herself, she'd weathered worse storms, but for what it might mean for Hartwell and Samuel. The situation came to a head on a bright Sunday morning when Reverend Morrison himself appeared at the ranch. Clara saw him coming from the kitchen window, his black coat and white collar unmistakable even at a distance. Her hands stilled on the bread dough she'd been shaping. "We have a visitor," she called to Hartwell, who was mending harnesses in the front room. He joined her at the window, his expression darkening when he recognized the rider. "Been expecting this," he muttered. The Reverend dismounted with the careful movements of a man unaccustomed to long rides. He was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes that held a hint of steel. "Jedediah," he said, extending his hand. "It's been too long, Reverend." Hartwell's handshake was brief. "Coffee? That would be welcome." Morrison's gaze found Clara, and he had offered a gentle smile. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore. I've heard you've brought some life back to this old place." "I do my best," Clara replied carefully, sensing the undercurrents in his words. They sat in the kitchen, Samuel sketching quietly in the corner. The Reverend sipped his coffee and made small talk about the weather, the prospects for the wheat crop, the new schoolhouse being built in town. Finally, he set down his cup with a soft clink. "Jed, I'll speak plainly. There's been talk." "Always is," Hartwell said flatly. "This is different. You know how people can be. A young woman, recently widowed, living here." Morrison spread his hands. "Questions are being raised about the propriety of the arrangement." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Hartwell has been nothing but honorable. I'm employed here as housekeeper. Nothing more." "I don't doubt it," Morrison said quickly. "But perception matters in a small community. There are those who say—" He paused, choosing his words. "Who question whether you're truly honoring Eliza's memory?" The temperature in the room dropped. Hartwell's knuckles whitened as he gripped his coffee cup. "Don't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't bring her into this." Morrison leaned forward. "Jed, you know I respected Eliza, loved her like a sister, but she's been gone 2 years. She wouldn't want you to— You don't know what she'd want." Hartwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Neither do I, because she's dead." "Jed, is there a point to this visit?" "Reverend, because I have work to do." Morrison sighed, looking every one of his 40 years. "I came to warn you, and to ask a question." He turned to face Hartwell directly. "Are you still bound by your promises to Eliza, or is it time to consider that God might have brought Mrs. Whitmore here for a reason?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara found herself holding her breath, waiting for Hartwell's response. "God," Hartwell said finally, "took my wife in a spring flood while I stood on the bank like a useless fool. So you'll forgive me if I don't much care what he might have in mind now." Morrison flinched, but held his ground. "Bitterness is a poison. Jed, it'll kill you as sure as any bullet. Then let it—" Hartwell moved to the door, holding it open. "Thank you for the warning. Reverend, I'll see you out." After Morrison left, the kitchen felt too small, too charged with unspoken words. Clara busied herself with preparing lunch while Hartwell stood at the window, watching the Reverend's retreating figure. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally. "If my presence here is causing you difficulties, you're not going anywhere." He turned to face her, his gray eyes fierce. "Not because of wagging tongues and not because of—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "You have work here as long as you want it." That evening, Clara couldn't shake her unease. She'd weathered gossip before, but this felt different. There was a meanness to it, a judgment that cut deeper than simple curiosity. She was hanging laundry when Samuel tugged on her sleeve, pointing toward the road. 3 women approached on foot, their Sunday best slightly dusty from the walk. Clara recognized Mrs. Henderson and her daughters, pillars of Cedar Ridge society. Mrs. Whitmore. Mrs. Henderson's smile was sharp as a blade. "We thought it was time for a proper visit." Clara knew a social ambush when she saw one, but manners demanded hospitality. "Please, come in. I'll make tea." They arranged themselves in the front room like a tribunal, backs straight, hands folded. Their eyes catalogued every detail: the mended curtains, the simple furniture, the absence of a woman's touch that might have been Eliza's. "Such a rustic situation, Mrs. Henderson observed. "You must find it quite different from what you're accustomed to. I find it peaceful." Clara replied evenly. "Still," the elder Miss Henderson chimed in, "it must be challenging. A young woman alone, save for the company of a man who is not your husband." "I'm hardly alone. My brother is with me. A child, and one who cannot even speak to defend your honor should questions arise." Mrs. Henderson's eyes glittered. "And questions do arise, Mrs. Whitmore." Clara set down the teapot carefully, afraid she might shatter it in her tightening grip. "If you have something to say, ma'am, I'd prefer you speak plainly." "Very well. Your presence here is causing talk. Unseemly talk. Mr. Hartwell is a respected man, despite his recent difficulties. We wouldn't want to see his reputation tarnished by association." "Association with what, exactly?" The younger Miss Henderson leaned forward. "There are those who wonder what kind of woman would install herself in a widower's home so soon after her own husband's passing. What she might be hoping to gain." Clara stood, her composure finally cracking. "I came here seeking honest work to feed my brother. Nothing more." "Perhaps, but intentions can be misconstrued, and Mr. Hartwell, in his grief, might be vulnerable to influences." Mrs. Henderson rose as well, gathering her daughters with a look. "We simply thought you should be aware of how things appear, for everyone's sake." After they left, Clara sank into a chair, shaking with anger and humiliation. She didn't hear Hartwell enter until he spoke. "Saw them leaving. They give you trouble?" She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, dusty from the fields. "Nothing I haven't heard before," she said, trying for lightness and failing. "Clara." The use of her first name made her breath catch. "What did they say?" She told him, watching his face darken with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Maybe they're right," she said quietly. "Maybe I should." "No." He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her chair. "Don't let them chase you off. Don't let them win. It's not about winning. It's about what's right. Your reputation. My reputation." He laughed bitterly. "I'm the man who let his wife drown. You think I care what they whisper about in town? You should care. This is your home, your community. You're my—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "You work for me. That's all anyone needs to know." But his hand covered hers on the arm of the chair, warm and calloused, and the look in his eyes said more than his words. Clara felt something shift between them. Some invisible line crossed. "Jed," she whispered, using his name for the first time. He pulled back as if burned. "I should check the stock." He was gone before she could respond. That night, Clara lay awake wrestling with indecision. She could leave, find work elsewhere, remove the source of gossip and temptation. It would be the proper thing, the safe thing. But when she rose before dawn to start breakfast, she found Jed already in the kitchen. He'd made coffee, terrible coffee, but the gesture touched her more than any words could have. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about what Morrison said, about Eliza." Clara waited, hardly daring to breathe. "She used to say I held on to things too tight, that I'd squeeze the life out of them trying to keep them safe." He stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. "Maybe she was right. Maybe I'm doing it still. Grief takes time," Clara said softly. 2 years, 2 years of barely living, just existing, and then you show up, humming her songs, bringing noise and life back to this place." He looked up at her then. "I don't know what to do with that. Clara, I don't know what's right anymore." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Maybe right isn't as clear-cut as we think. Maybe it's just 2 people trying to survive, finding they survive better together than apart." He turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. "The talk won't stop. It'll likely get worse. I've weathered storms before. This one's different. This one's because of me." "No," Clara said firmly. "It's because small people need to make others smaller to feel big. That's not your fault or mine." They sat in the pre-dawn quiet, hands linked across the scarred wooden table. Outside, a rooster crowed, heralding another day. Samuel would wake soon, hungry and eager to draw. Chores would need doing. Life would continue its relentless forward march. But for now, in this moment, 2 wounded souls found comfort in a simple touch, a shared understanding that some connections transcend propriety and gossip. It wasn't a declaration or a promise. It was just 2 people choosing not to let go. The market day in Cedar Ridge dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring morning that made the harsh winter seem like a distant memory. Clara had spent the previous evening baking fresh bread, apple pies, and the ginger snaps that Samuel loved. It was her way of fighting back against the gossip, meeting judgment with kindness, whispers with warm bread. "You don't have to do this," Hartwell said as he helped her load the wagon. "I can send one of the hands to town for supplies." Hiding would only feed their suspicions. Clara replied, arranging her baskets with care. "Besides, we need the income. Your generous wages aside, I won't be beholden to anyone." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her determined chin and steady hands. "You're a brave woman, Clara Whitmore. Just a practical one." But his words warmed her more than she cared to admit. Samuel climbed into the wagon bed, clutching his drawing pad, his constant companion since Hartwell had given him the pencils. Clara noticed he'd been sketching Hartwell more often lately, capturing the man's quiet strength in careful strokes. The journey to town took 2 hours, winding through country that grew more beautiful with each passing week. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides in splashes of yellow and purple, and the air carried the sweet scent of new grass, Clara found herself humming again, then stopped, remembering Hartwell's reaction to the hymn. Some wounds, she'd learned, required careful navigation. Cedar Ridge on market day was a bustling place. Farmers brought produce, ranchers drove in cattle, and the town's merchants displayed their wares along Main Street. Clara found a spot near the church and began setting up her modest display. At first, people passed by with averted eyes or tight smiles, but then young Tommy Morrison, the Reverend's son, approached, drawn by the smell of fresh bread. "Ma'am, how much for a loaf?" "10 cents, Clara said warmly. "But for you, Tommy, 8 cents if you promise to share with your sisters." The boy's face lit up, and the transaction was completed under the watchful eyes of several townswomen. It broke the ice, slightly. Others began to approach, lured by quality and fair prices, even if they disapproved of the baker. Clara was wrapping a pie for Mrs. Chen when she heard the commotion. Raised voices, the sound of scuffling, and then Samuel's high, frightened cry. She spun around to see her brother cornered against a building by 3 men, his drawing pad scattered in the dirt. "Look at this, boys," one of them slurred, clearly deep in his cups despite the early hour. "The dummy's been drawing pictures. What's this supposed to be? Freak?" Clara recognized him, Jack Henley, a drifter who did odd jobs when sober enough to hold a hammer. The other 2 were strangers, probably passing through, but their eyes held the same mean glint. "Leave him alone," Clara said sharply, moving toward them. Henley grabbed Samuel's arm when the boy tried to retrieve his drawings. "What's wrong, dummy? Cat got your tongue." He laughed at his own joke, shaking Samuel hard enough to make his teeth rattle. "I said leave him alone." Clara pushed between them, but one of Henley's companions caught her shoulder, spinning her around. Well, the widow woman thinks she's tough." His breath reeked of cheap whiskey. "Maybe you need a man to teach you some manners. Heard you're getting plenty of teaching out at the Hartwell place." Clara slapped him. The crack echoed across the suddenly quiet market street. The man's face darkened with rage, and he raised his hand to strike back. The punch never landed. A blur of motion, and suddenly the man was on the ground. Hartwell standing over him with fists clenched. Clara hadn't even heard him arrive. "Touch her again," Hartwell said quietly, "and I'll kill you." There was no heat in the words, just cold certainty. The man scrambled backward, nose bleeding freely. Henley released Samuel, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No harm meant, Hartwell, just having some fun with the dummy." Hartwell's fist connected with Henley's jaw with a sound like breaking wood. The drunk went down hard, didn't get up. The third man took one look at Hartwell's face and ran. "Jed, stop!" Clara caught his arm as he advanced on the fallen men. "They're not worth it." For a moment, she thought he might shake her off, lost in the kind of rage that got men killed or worse in the territories. Then Samuel pressed against his other side, trembling, and something in Hartwell's face softened. "You all right, son?" he asked, dropping to one knee beside the boy. Samuel nodded, signing rapidly. Hartwell couldn't read the signs, but he understood the distress. He gathered the scattered drawings with careful hands, smoothing out the crumpled pages. "These are good," he said quietly. "Real good. Don't let anyone tell you different." Sheriff Watson arrived then, badge glinting in the morning sun. He was a fair man, but tired, worn down by years of keeping peace in a town that grew rougher with each passing season. "What happened here?" Several voices spoke at once, but it was Mrs. Henderson who stepped forward, her tone cutting through the noise. "Mr. Hartwell attacked these men without provocation. We all saw it. That's a lie," Clara said hotly. "They were harassing my brother, and when I intervened, you struck first." "Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "I saw you slap that poor man, after he put hands on her." "Mrs. Chen spoke up, surprising everyone. "After they terrorized the boy. I saw it all." The sheriff looked between them, weighing testimony and politics with the tired eyes of experience. "Hartwell, you'll need to come with me." "The hell I will." Hartwell's stance widened, ready for a fight. "Jed, please." Clara touched his arm. Don't make this worse." He looked at her for a long moment, then at Samuel, who was clutching his rescued drawings like a lifeline. Something passed across his face. Resignation, perhaps, or recognition. "Fine," he said. "But the boy and Mrs. Whitmore come too. I want them where I can see them safe." The sheriff nodded, understanding the compromise. As they walked toward the jail, Clara noticed something that made her heart sink and soar simultaneously. Not everyone looked away. The Reverend's wife nodded slightly. "Mr." Patterson from the feed store touched his hat. Small gestures, but in a town like Cedar Ridge, they meant something. At the jail, Sheriff Watson took statements from everyone involved. Henley and his friend were locked up for drunk and disorderly conduct, though Clara knew they'd be released come morning. Hartwell was held pending further investigation. "This is wrong," Clara said through the bars. "You were protecting us." "Worth it," Hartwell replied simply, "though I'm sorry you had to see that side of me." "What side? The one that protects people who can't protect themselves?" She reached through the bars, touching his bruised knuckles. "I'm not sorry." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Visiting hours are over. Ma'am, you can see him at the hearing tomorrow." Clara gathered Samuel, who'd been drawing steadily throughout the ordeal, his way of processing trauma. As they left, she heard Hartwell call out, "Clara, take the wagon home. Don't wait around town." "I'm not leaving you here. Please." The single word carried weight. "For the boy's sake." She wanted to argue, but Samuel was exhausted, overwhelmed by the day's events. Reluctantly, she agreed. The drive home felt endless. Samuel curled against her side, his breathing eventually evening out in sleep. Clara's mind churned with worry and something else, the memory of Hartwell's fierce protection, the way he dropped everything to come to their aid. She was unhitching the horses when Reverend Morrison arrived, his face grave. "Mrs. Whitmore, I heard what happened. Have you come to tell me this is God's judgment for improper living?" The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. "No." Morrison dismounted, his movements careful. "I've come to ask if you'd be willing to speak at the hearing tomorrow. Your testimony could make the difference." "Of course I'll speak, but will anyone listen? Your congregation seems to have made up their minds about me." Morrison had the grace to look ashamed. "Some have, but not all. What happened today? It's opened some eyes. A man doesn't nearly beat two drunks to death over a woman who means nothing to him." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. He was protecting Samuel. He was protecting both of you, and everyone saw it. Morrison paused. "Including my wife. She asked me to give you this." He handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a delicate handkerchief embroidered with forget-me-nots. A lady's gift to another lady. A social acknowledgement worth more than words. "Tell her thank you," Clara said softly. "Tell her yourself. At church on Sunday, perhaps." After Morrison left, Clara sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Samuel sat beside her, showing her his drawings from the day. One caught her eye, Hartwell standing protective over their small family. Larger than life. A guardian rendered in careful pencil strokes. Family. When had she started thinking of them that way? When had Hartwell's presence become as necessary as breathing? She thought of him in that cell, thought of the controlled violence he displayed in their defense. Some might see brutality. She saw a man who'd found something worth fighting for again, after 2 years of barely fighting to survive. Tomorrow would bring the hearing. More gossip, more judgment. But tonight, Clara allowed herself a moment of pure truth. She was falling in love with Jedediah Hartwell. It was inconvenient, improper, and probably impossible. It was also as real as the Wyoming earth beneath her feet, as undeniable as the mountains that stood witness to their strange, wounded, wonderful attempt at building something new from the ashes of their losses. The hearing had gone better than expected. Sheriff Watson, swayed by testimony from Clara and several unexpected witnesses, released Hartwell with a warning about keeping his temper in check. The ride home had been quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The events of the day settling like dust after a storm. Now, 2 days later, life had returned to its rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. But Clara noticed the changes. Hartwell lingered in the kitchen after meals instead of retreating immediately. His eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. The very air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. "I'm thinking of leaving." Clara looked up from the stove where she was preparing supper, certain she'd misheard. Hartwell stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his face set in hard lines. "What? After harvest, I'll pay you through winter. Make sure you and the boy are set up somewhere proper." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's best." Clara set down the spoon carefully, afraid her shaking hands might drop it. Best for whom? For everyone. He turned his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture she'd never seen from him before. "What happened in town? It'll happen again, maybe worse. You don't deserve to live under that shadow. That's my choice to make." "Is it?" He finally looked at her, and the anguish in his eyes took her breath away. "Every day you stay here, your reputation suffers. Every kindness you show me breeds more gossip. I won't be the man who ruins you." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, fighting for composure. "So you'll be the man who abandons his own land, who runs from shadows? If that's what it takes to keep you safe, yes. Safe from what? Jed? From gossip? From judgment?" She stepped closer. "Or from you." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "Maybe from all of it. You're a coward." The words came out harsh, driven by hurt. "Not for staying on that riverbank, for this, for giving up before we've even tried." "Tried what?" His voice rose. "What is there to try, Clara? I'm a broken man haunted by a dead wife. You're a young woman who deserves better than... Than what? Than you?" Clara's own temper flared. "Don't you dare decide what I deserve. Don't you dare make my choices for me. Someone has to..." He slammed his hat against the door frame. "Because you clearly can't see what's right in front of you. I'm no good. Clara, I failed Eliza, and I'll fail you too." "How?" Clara demanded. "By protecting us, by giving us a home, by showing Sam more kindness than he's known since our father died, by wanting things I have no right to want." The words seemed torn from him. "By lying awake at night thinking of you in the next room, by watching you hum in the kitchen and wishing..." He cut himself off, turning away. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Wishing what?" "Nothing. It doesn't matter. It matters to me." She caught his arm, forcing him to face her. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll pack tonight." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "You know I can't. Then stop being noble. Stop deciding my fate. Stop acting like caring for each other is some kind of sin." "Caring?" He laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it?" For a moment, he stood frozen. Then, with a sound that might have been surrender or salvation, he pulled her against him. The kiss was desperate, hungry. 2 years of grief and months of denial colliding in a moment of pure need. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as if he might disappear. He tasted of coffee and sorrow, and something wild that matched the landscape around them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Clara," he whispered against her hair. "This can't, we shouldn't, Jed." She pulled back enough to see his face. "Tell me about her. Tell me the truth. All of it." He stiffened, but she held on. "If we're going to move forward, or apart, I need to know what we're really fighting." For a long moment, she thought he'd pull away. Then, slowly, he sank into a kitchen chair. Clara poured coffee, gave him time to gather his words. She wasn't happy here. The admission seemed to pain him physically. Oh, she tried. God knows she tried. But Eliza was a town girl, used to society, to proper houses with proper gardens. This, he gestured at the window, the endless expanse beyond. This was my dream, not hers. Clara sat across from him, waiting. We'd been trying for a baby. Years of trying, years of disappointment. The doctor in Cheyenne said it might never happen, but Eliza wouldn't give up. Then, That spring, she finally caught. She was so happy. Clara, happier than I'd seen her in years. His hands tightened around the coffee cup. But she was scared too. Scared of birthing out here, with no doctor nearby. Scared of raising a child in this wilderness. I told her it would be fine, that pioneer women had been doing it for generations. I didn't listen. I never really listened. What happened? She started bleeding. Just a little at first, but it wouldn't stop. I wanted to take her to town, but she said she was fine, that it was normal. By the time she admitted how bad it was, he trailed off. She went to the river that morning to wash the blood from her clothes. Didn't want me to see how much there'd been. The bank gave way. She was already weak. Jed. Clara reached for his hand. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I brought her here. I kept her here even when I knew she was miserable. I put my wants above her needs. And it killed her. He looked at Clara with haunted eyes. Just like I'm doing with you. I'm selfish. Clara, I want you to stay even though I know it'll ruin you. What kind of man does that make me? Clara stood, moving around the table to kneel beside his chair. It makes you human. It makes you a man who's been alone too long, carrying guilt that isn't all yours to carry. She wrote me a letter, he said suddenly. Never sent it. I found it after. Said she forgave me for bringing her here, that she knew I loved her even if I loved the land more. Asked me to forgive myself. He laughed bitterly. How do you forgive yourself for loving wrong? By learning to love better. He looked down at her, something shifting in his expression. Is that what this is? Love? I don't know, Clara admitted. But I'd like the chance to find out, without you running away, without the ghost of who you think you should be standing between us. The talk won't stop. If anything, it'll get worse. Then we face it. Together. She rose, cupping his face in her hands. Or we let them win. Your choice. Jedediah Hartwell, but make it for the right reasons. Not out of fear or guilt or some misguided attempt to protect me. I've been protecting myself for years. What I need, what we both need, is someone to stand with, not someone to hide behind. He covered her hands with his calluses rough against her skin. You're asking me to risk everything? No. I'm asking you to stop acting like you have nothing left to risk. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. We're already broken. Jed, both of us. But maybe broken pieces can fit together in new ways. Maybe they can make something stronger. The kitchen door burst open, making them spring apart. Samuel stood there, eyes wide with excitement, gesturing urgently toward the window. They followed his pointing finger and saw smoke rising from the direction of the barn. Fire! Hartwell was moving before the word fully formed. Clara, right behind him. The barn was fully engulfed. Flames licking at the evening sky. The horses screamed in terror, trapped in their stalls. Without hesitation, Hartwell plunged into the smoke. Jed, no! Clara started after him, but the heat drove her back. Samuel tugged at her sleeve, pointing to the water pump. Understanding. She raced to fill buckets, though she knew it was futile against the inferno. Through the smoke, she could hear Hartwell calling to the horses, the crash of stall doors being kicked open. One by one, the horses burst from the barn, coats singed but alive. Clara counted 3, 4, 5. Where was Hartwell? Then he emerged, coughing, leading the last mare. His shirt was smoking, his face black with soot. Clara ran to him, helping him away from the collapsing structure. Are you insane? She beat at the smoldering patches on his clothes. You could have been killed. Couldn't... He doubled over, coughing. Couldn't lose them, too. As the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, Clara held him, both of them kneeling in the dirt. Samuel brought water, and she helped Hartwell drink, checking him for burns. Did you see how it started? She asked. He shook his head, still catching his breath. Then Samuel held up something he'd found near the barn. A torch, the kind used for night riding, its end still wrapped in oil-soaked rags. Hartwell's face darkened. This was no accident. They spent the night watching for more fires, taking turns on guard, As dawn broke over the smoking ruins of the barn, Hartwell surveyed the damage with grim eyes. "This is what I meant," he said quietly. "This is what happens to people who stand too close to me. This is what happens when small minds resort to violence." Clara corrected. "And it changes nothing." He turned to her, soot still streaking his face. "How can you say that?" "Because running now means they win. It means Samuel learns that bullies always get their way. It means we let fear dictate our lives." She stepped closer. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," he said roughly, "is for you to be safe. Then help me rebuild the barn. Help me show this town that we won't be driven off by cowards who strike in darkness." She took his hand. "Fight with me, not for me." He looked at their joined hands, at Samuel watching them with hope in his young eyes, at the land he'd worked so hard to build into a home. Then he squeezed her fingers. "All right," he said. "We rebuild, we stay. We fight if we have to." He pulled her closer. "But we do it together. No more noble sacrifices. No more running. Together." Clara agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of smoke and new beginnings. The rain had started just after midnight, a gentle patter that grew into a steady downpour by dawn. Clara woke to the sound of it drumming on the roof, and for a moment felt only peace. Then memory rushed back. The barn fire, the long night of watching, the promise she and Jed had made in the smoky dawn. She found him already awake, standing at the kitchen window with coffee in hand, watching the rain wash away the last of the ash. He'd cleaned up but still smelled faintly of smoke. "It's good," he said without turning. "Rain will stop any embers from spreading." Clara poured her own coffee and joined him. Through the gray morning light, the skeletal remains of the barn looked like the ribs of some ancient beast. But beyond that destruction, the land stretched green and renewed. "I found something," she said quietly. "When I was cleaning out that old trunk in the storage room, I wasn't snooping. It's all right." He glanced at her. "What did you find?" Clara retrieved the letter from her apron pocket, handling it carefully. The paper was worn at the creases, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. "It's addressed to you, from Eliza, but it was never opened." Jed's hand trembled slightly as he took it. "Where? Tucked inside an old Bible. Maybe she meant to give it to you, or maybe she hid it. I don't know if I should have." "No." He turned the letter over in his hands. "No, I'm glad you did." He stood there for a long moment, then held it out to her. "Read it to me." "Jed, I couldn't. It's private. Please." His voice was rough. "I don't think I can do it alone." Clara took the letter back, broke the seal with careful fingers. Eliza's handwriting was elegant, though towards the end it grew unsteady. "My dearest Jed," Clara began, her voice soft in the rain-hushed kitchen. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I pray it hasn't. Pray that I'll find the courage to say these words aloud instead. But I know my own cowardice too well. I need you to know that I don't blame you. Not for bringing me here, not for loving this land the way you do, not for being who you are. I knew who I was marrying, a man whose dreams were as vast as the Wyoming sky. I thought I could share those dreams, thought love would be enough to make me brave. I was wrong about myself, not about you. This land requires a strength I don't possess, a wildness I can't embrace. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But I'm withering here like a hothouse flower planted in desert soil. The baby, I haven't told you yet as I write this. I'm scared. Jed, scared of birthing here, scared of raising a child so far from everything I know, but mostly scared that I'm too weak to be the wife and mother you deserve. If something happens to me, promise you won't close yourself off. Promise you'll find someone strong enough to match you, wild enough to love this land alongside you. Someone who hums while she works and doesn't mind the dust and isolation. Someone who can give you the family we dreamed of. I release you, my love, from guilt, from grief, from the promises that are keeping you bound to a ghost. Be happy, be whole, be loved. Forever yours, Eliza. By the time Clara finished, Tears were streaming down both their faces. Jed sank into a chair, the letter clutched in his hands. "She knew," he whispered. "Even then, she knew." Clara knelt beside him, not touching, just present. She loved you, and I loved her, but not the right way, not the way she needed. He looked at Clara with wondering eyes. "She described you. Someone who hums while she works. How could she have known?" "Maybe she didn't. Maybe she just knew what you needed." Thunder rolled across the valley, and Samuel appeared in the doorway, awakened by the storm. He took in their tear-stained faces with concern. Moving to Jed's other side, the man reached out, ruffled the boy's sleep-mussed hair. "It's all right, son. Sometimes tears are healing." They sat like that as the storm intensified, 3 souls finding comfort in proximity. Then Jed stood, purpose in his movements. "Get dressed," he told them. "Both of you." "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "To town, to church." He met her surprised gaze. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right, in front of God and everybody." Clara's heart leaped. "Jed, what are you saying?" He pulled her to her feet, cupping her face in his hands. "I'm saying Eliza was right. I've been bound to a ghost, letting guilt and fear rule my life. I'm saying you were right too. We're broken pieces that might fit together into something stronger." He took a breath. "I'm saying I love you, Clara Whitmore, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." "The rain," she started weakly, "will wash us clean. Seems fitting." He kissed her, soft and sure. "Marry me. Today, before I lose my courage or the town finds another way to drive us apart." "Yes," the word came without hesitation. "Yes, but Jed, are you certain? No doubts, no regrets." "The only thing I'd regret is letting you go." He glanced at Samuel, who was watching with bright eyes. "Both of you, you've become my family. Let me make it official." They dressed in their best clothes, Clara in the blue dress she'd worn to her first husband's funeral, now repurposed for a beginning instead of an ending. Jed wore his black suit, the one that smelled of cedar from long storage. Samuel proudly donned the new shirt Clara had sewn for him. The ride to town was wet and wild, the storm turning roads to mud, but inside the wagon, wrapped in oilcloths and hope, they were warm. Samuel sat between them, clutching the letter from Eliza that Jed had insisted on bringing. "For witness," he'd said. "So she's part of this too." The church was nearly empty when they arrived. Only a handful of early arrivals for Sunday service. Reverend Morrison looked up from his preparations with surprise that shifted quickly to understanding. "Jed, Mrs. Whitmore." He took in their rain-soaked state, their joined hands. "How can I help you?" "We need you to perform a marriage," Jed said simply. "Now, today." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "That's sudden. There are usually preparations, announcements." "We've had enough announcements, enough judgment." Jed's voice was firm. "Will you do it or not?" Before Morrison could answer, the church door opened. Mrs. Chen entered, shaking water from her umbrella, followed by the Patterson family and, surprisingly, Mrs. Morrison. "Word travels fast in a storm," the Reverend's wife said with a small smile. "When folks saw your wagon heading to church in this weather, they got curious." More people trickled in, drawn by curiosity or providence. Not the whole town, but enough. Even Mrs. Henderson appeared, though she sat in the back with pursed lips. Morrison looked at the gathering crowd, then at the couple before him. "Well," he said finally, "it seems we have witnesses. Do you have rings?" Jed pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. If that's all right." Clara nodded, throat too tight for words. "And for you, Jed?" Morrison asked. Clara looked stricken. She had nothing to give. But Samuel tugged at her sleeve, holding out a small object. It was a ring he'd made from braided horsehair, something he'd been working on in secret. "Oh, Sam!" Clara hugged him tight, then showed Jed. "Would you?" "It's perfect," Jed said, kneeling to Samuel's level. "Thank you, son." And so they were married in that simple church, rain pounding on the roof like applause. Morrison spoke the old words, and they made the eternal promises. When he reached the part about objections, the church held its breath. But even Mrs. Henderson kept her peace. "By the power vested in me," Morrison concluded, "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jed drew Clara close, and their kiss was sweet with tears and rain and redemption. Samuel whooped, the first sound he'd made in 3 years, and the church erupted. It wasn't a word, exactly, just a joyful noise, but it was enough to break the dam. "Home," Samuel said, the word rusty but clear. "Home," Clara sobbed, falling to her knees to embrace her brother. Jed wrapped them both in his arms, and for a moment the three of them were the only people in the world. When they finally stood, the church was buzzing. "Doctor," Watson pushed forward, wanting to examine Samuel. Others offered congratulations. Some sincere, others grudging. But Clara noticed the shift. They were Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell now. Legitimate in the eyes of God and law. They signed the register with rain-wet fingers, Eliza's letter tucked beneath it like a blessing. As they prepared to leave, Morrison pulled Jed aside. "She would be happy for you," the Reverend said quietly. "Eliza, she wanted you to live again. I know that now." Jed glanced at his new family. "Took me long enough to believe it." The ride home was quieter, Samuel worn out from the excitement of finding his voice. He dozed between them, occasionally murmuring, "home," in his sleep. "No wedding night in a fancy hotel," Jed said ruefully. "No honeymoon trip, just a ranch with no barn and too much work. You sure you know what you've signed up for, Mrs. Hartwell?" "I signed up for you," Clara said simply. "The rest we'll figure out together." They reached the ranch as the storm finally broke. Sunset painting the wet world in shades of gold and rose. The burned barn looked less like destruction and more like opportunity, space to build something new, something theirs. That night, in the bed that had once been Eliza's, they came together as husband and wife. It was tender and fierce by turns. Two scarred souls learning each other's geography. Outside, the world was washed clean. Inside, they made their own storm. Later, as Clara lay in Jed's arms listening to his heartbeat, she thought about the strange paths that had brought them here, pain and loss, judgment and redemption, all woven together into something that might, with luck and work, become happiness. "No regrets?" she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her, "Only that it took so long to find you." From the next room came the sound of Samuel mumbling in his sleep. Not wordless noises now, but actual words. Simple things like good and happy and always, always. Home. They'd built something here. Clara realized, not just a marriage or a household, but a true family, forged in fire, tested by storms, blessed by ghosts, and stronger for all of it. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The barn needed rebuilding. The town's judgment hadn't disappeared with a ceremony. The land itself would test them with drought and flood, feast and famine. But tonight, wrapped in love and rain-washed peace, they were home. The morning sun painted the Snake River golden as the Hartwell family prepared to leave Wyoming forever. 3 months had passed since the barn burning. 3 months of rebuilding only to face more harassment. The decision to leave hadn't come easily. But when masked riders shot out their windows in the dead of night, narrowly missing Samuel's bed, even Jed's stubborn pride had yielded to necessity. Clara stood at the water's edge, remembering another morning by another river, when she'd been a desperate widow with a mute brother and nothing but hope. Now she was wife to a good man, mother to a chattering boy who couldn't seem to stop making up for 3 years of silence, and carrying new life beneath her heart. "You sure about this?" Jed asked, joining her at the riverbank. His arm came around her naturally now, drawing her close. "About Montana. Yes, about stopping here first." She placed her hand over his. "Even more certain." Behind them, Samuel was securing the last of their possessions to the wagon, a task he took seriously as the man of the family when Jed wasn't looking. Among their things was a new cradle Jed had carved during the long winter evenings, working by lamplight while Clara sewed tiny clothes. "We could just go," Jed said quietly. "Leave it all behind. Never look back." "We could." Clara turned in his arms. "But that's not who we are. We face things, remember, together." He kissed her forehead, then called to Samuel. "Come on, son, time to say goodbye." The boy ran to them, no longer the silent, scared child of a year ago. "Can I sing, Ma, like we practiced?" "Of course, sweetheart." They stood together at the river's edge, the same spot where Eliza had died, where Jed had carried his guilt like stones in his pockets, where Clara had first understood the depth of his wounds. Samuel's clear young voice rose in the morning air, singing "Shall We Gather at the River," the hymn that had broken and remade them. Clara joined him, her voice harmonizing with her brother's. After a moment, Jed added his rough baritone, unpracticed but sincere. The old words took on new meaning, speaking not of death but of life, not of ending but of beginning. As the last note faded across the water, Jed pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were 3 items: Eliza's wedding ring, the letters she'd written, and a new photograph, their family, taken just last week by a traveling photographer. "Eliza," he said to the river, to the sky, to the memory that no longer haunted but blessed. "Thank you for loving me, for letting me go, for somehow knowing I'd find them." His voice caught. "We're leaving now, starting fresh, but we'll carry the good parts with us, the love, the lessons, the reminder that life's too short for fear." He knelt by the water's edge and set the box gently into the current. They watched it float away, carrying the past downstream, making room for the future. "Now," Samuel asked, bouncing with excitement. "Can we go now?" "Now," Jed confirmed, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders. "Montana's waiting." As they walked back to the wagon, Clara began humming again. Not the hymn this time, but a new melody, one that spoke of journeys and hope. Jed helped her up onto the seat, his hands lingering on her waist. "Have I told you today that I love you, Mrs. Hartwell?" "Only twice," she teased. "You're falling behind. Can't have that." He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "I love you. I love our son. I love whoever this little one turns out to be." His hand briefly touched her still flat stomach. "I love the life we're building. Even if it means starting over, new place, new people, new challenges. Especially then." He clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. "We're good at starting over. We've had practice." Samuel wedged himself between them, chattering about all the things he'd do in Montana, help build their new barn, learn to fish, maybe even go to school if they had one. His words tumbled over each other in his eagerness to share every thought. "And we can sing in the church choir, right, Ma? All of us? Even Pa, though he sounds like a rusty gate." "Hey now," Jed protested, but he was smiling. "I sound like a perfectly respectable gate. Thank you very much." They laughed, all of them, together. The sound bright as morning. The road stretched ahead, dusty and uncertain, leading to a place none of them had seen, but it didn't matter. They'd learned that home wasn't a place, but a choice, renewed daily in small acts of courage and care. As they passed the ruins of the burned barn, Clara didn't look back. That chapter was closed. Instead, she looked at her husband, still bearing scars but no longer defined by them. At her brother, voice restored and spirit blooming. At her own hands, resting on the gentle swell where new life grew. "You know," she said as Wyoming began to fade behind them, "I think we should sing more in Montana, maybe start every morning with a hymn." "Every morning," Jed groaned theatrically. "What have I gotten myself into?" "A life," Clara said simply. "A real, messy, beautiful life. With singing," Samuel added firmly. "Lots and lots of singing." "With singing," Jed agreed, reaching over to ruffle the boy's hair. "Though I'm holding out for coffee first." They rode on through the morning, their voices occasionally rising in song, sometimes falling into comfortable silence. Behind them, the Snake River continued its ancient course, carrying their sorrows out to sea. Ahead, the mountains rose purple and promising, guardians of their new beginning. It had been a long journey from that desperate night in Wind's Hollow to this hopeful morning on the trail. They'd weathered storms both literal and figurative, faced down prejudice and violence, lost old dreams and found new ones. They'd learned that love wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it was fierce as a prairie fire, demanding as the land itself. But they'd also learned that broken hearts could mend stronger at the seams, that families could be built from fragments, that sometimes the greatest courage was simply choosing to continue. They'd learned that grief and joy could coexist, that the past could bless the future, that home was wherever they faced the horizon together. "Clara," Jed's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You're humming again. Is that a problem? Mr. Hartwell?" "No, ma'am." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. "It's the sound of home." Samuel started humming too, a different tune that somehow harmonized with Clara's. After a moment, even Jed joined in, his rumbling bass anchoring their improvised chorus. They were still humming when they crested the final hill. Wyoming spread behind them like a faded photograph. Ahead lay Montana, vast, unknown, promising. Clara had no idea what they'd find there. New challenges, certainly. New joys, God willing. New chances to prove that love was stronger than loss, that hope could bloom even in the hardest ground. But for now, it was enough to be together on this road, making music from nothing, carrying their small light into whatever darkness waited. It was enough to be alive, to be loved, to be heading home, wherever that turned out to be. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces, blessing their journey, and still they hummed. Three voices weaving together like streams converging into a river, flowing steadily toward tomorrow. In her belly, Clara felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like wings, a promise of life continuing its ancient dance. She placed Jed's hand where he could feel it too, watched wonder bloom across his face. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the adventure." And on they went, into the bright morning, into their new life, into the vast and beautiful unknown. Behind them, the ghosts rested easy. Ahead, the future beckoned. They were ready for whatever came next. They were together. They were home. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope Clara and Jed's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like the pioneers who blazed these trails before us. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, loss, and redemption from America's frontier days. What did you think of Clara and Jed's story? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear what moved you most. Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright.